Lord, break every chain and restore my black family's heart morning prayer. You can't come in here, Mrs. Jackson. The board meeting started 20 minutes ago, and your family's case has already been dismissed. With all due respect, Mr. Peterson, I have every right to be heard, and I won't leave until the board acknowledges what your bank has done to my family. Eleanor Jackson stood perfectly still in the doorway of the First National Bank's executive conference room, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun, clutching a worn leather portfolio filled with 40 years of family documents. The 7 board members stared back at her with expressions ranging from irritation to embarrassment. Eleanor was 68, with the dignified bearing of a retired schoolteacher who had taught 3 generations of children in this small town. Her simple navy dress and sensible shoes contrasted sharply with the expensive suits around the glossy mahogany table. Board Chairman Richard Peterson rose from his seat, his face flushing with anger. Mrs. Jackson, this is highly inappropriate. The decision is final. Your son defaulted on his loans and the foreclosure proceedings are already underway. There's nothing more to discuss. Eleanor took 3 measured steps into the room. My son James worked for your bank for 15 years before you let him go. My husband helped build this bank in 1962, when most establishments in this town wouldn't even let us through the front door. This property has been in our family for 3 generations, since my grandparents bought it after leaving the South during the Great Migration. And now you're taking it based on paperwork that I can prove was falsified. Tension in the room crackled like static electricity before a storm. Eleanor pulled out a folder and placed it carefully on the table. I have evidence that my son's loan documents were altered after he signed them. The interest rates were changed, and additional fees were added that he never agreed to. Board member Sarah Collins, the only woman besides Eleanor in the room, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Richard Peterson glanced at his watch. Security will be here any moment, Mrs. Jackson. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Eleanor looked him directly in the eyes. I taught your daughter, Richard. I taught all of your children. I've lived in this community for 70 years. Is this how you repay decades of service? By stealing my family's legacy? But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Eleanor Jackson woke up in the same bedroom where she had slept for the past 45 years. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains Eleanor had sewn herself in 1979, casting delicate patterns across the faded quilt her mother had made as a wedding gift. Eleanor opened her eyes slowly, the weight of the day ahead already pressing on her chest. Today was the final board meeting before the foreclosure on her son James's house would become irreversible, the house that sat on land her family had owned since 1948. She reached for the framed photograph on her nightstand, her late husband Thomas in his postal worker uniform, smiling proudly on the day of his retirement in 1990. "Give me strength today, Thomas," she whispered. "The Lord knows I need it." The aroma of coffee drifted up from the kitchen. Her daughter-in-law Marie was already awake, despite having worked the late shift at the hospital where she served as a nurse. Eleanor pulled on her robe and made her way carefully down the stairs, each creak in the worn wooden steps as familiar to her as the verses of her favorite hymns. Marie sat at the kitchen table, her nursing scrubs replaced by a simple t-shirt and jeans, dark circles underlining her eyes. Their granddaughter Zora just turned 17 and the spitting image of Eleanor in her youth stood at the stove making pancakes. "Morning, Mama Eleanor," Marie said, pushing a cup of coffee toward her mother-in-law. "Did you sleep at all?" Eleanor shook her head. "Not much, been praying most of the night." Zora brought over a plate of pancakes. "Made your favorite, Grandma, with blueberries." Eleanor patted her granddaughter's hand. "Thank you, sweetheart. Where's your daddy this morning?" A shadow passed over Marie's face. "He left before dawn, said he needed to clear his head. You know how he gets." Eleanor nodded. James had always been sensitive, brilliant, but burdened by a deep sense of responsibility. When he'd lost his position at the bank last year during what they'd called a reorganization, it had hit him hard. 15 years of service, working his way up from teller to loan officer, only to be replaced by a younger man with connections to the board. "He'll be back," Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. "The Lord never gives us more than we can bear," Marie sighed. "I just wish he'd talk to us instead of carrying it all alone." "It's not his fault they changed the terms on us after he signed those papers. Which is exactly why I'm going to that board meeting today," Eleanor said, straightening her shoulders. "Richard Peterson needs to look me in the eye and explain how he can do this to a family that's given so much to this community." Zora sat down beside her grandmother. "Is it true, Grandma, that we might lose everything?" Eleanor took her granddaughter's hand. Not everything, child. They can take the house, but they can't take what makes us a family. They can't take our dignity. But this is our home, Zora said, her voice cracking. All my memories are here, all our history. And that's why I'm fighting, Eleanor replied. Not just for the house, but for what it represents. Your great-grandparents didn't come all the way from Mississippi during the Great Migration to have their sacrifices forgotten. Marie looked at the clock on the wall, an old Seth Thomas that had been Eleanor's wedding gift. The meeting's at 11. We should start getting ready. Eleanor nodded. I need to find those original loan papers. James showed them to me before all this started. I know they're different from what the bank is claiming he signed. They're in his desk, Marie said. I'll help you look. As they searched through James's meticulously organized home office, Eleanor's mind drifted back to 1978, when she and Thomas had helped their son buy his first car. James had been so proud, insisting on making every payment himself, teaching himself about interest rates and insurance. That same determination had carried him through college, working nights at the post office alongside his father. Found them, Marie announced, pulling a folder from the bottom drawer. James kept everything. Eleanor took the folder and opened it carefully. There they were, the original loan documents with the terms James had agreed to. She compared them with the copies the bank had sent when they began foreclosure proceedings. The differences were subtle but significant: interest rates adjusted upward, payment terms shortened, additional fees inserted. Marie, look at this, Eleanor said, pointing to the discrepancies. This isn't what James signed. Someone altered these documents. Marie leaned closer, her nursing training having taught her to notice details. You're right, even the signature looks different on some pages, like they replaced them. Eleanor felt a chill despite the warm June morning. Richard Peterson's son took over the mortgage department last year, right after James was let go. You think they targeted us? Marie asked. I don't know, Eleanor replied honestly, but I intend to find out. As Eleanor prepared to leave for the meeting, she dressed with deliberate care, choosing a navy dress she'd worn to church for years, simple pearl earrings Thomas had given her on their 25th anniversary, and sensible shoes that wouldn't betray her if her knees weakened. She wasn't just dressing for a meeting. She was armoring herself for battle. Zora appeared in the doorway of Eleanor's bedroom, now dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark jeans. I'm coming with you, Grandma. Eleanor looked at her granddaughter's determined face, so much like her own at that age. This might get ugly, child. All the more reason you shouldn't go alone, Zora replied. You always taught us to stand together as a family. Eleanor's heart swelled with pride and sadness. At 17, Zora should be worrying about college applications and prom dresses, not fighting to save her family's home. But there was wisdom in her young eyes that reminded Eleanor of her own mother. All right, Eleanor agreed. But you stay quiet and watch. There are lessons here you won't learn in any classroom. Marie drove them to the bank in her aging Honda, the air conditioning struggling against the June heat. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat, the folder of documents on her lap like a shield. Zora was quiet in the back seat, texting occasionally with friends who'd heard about the Jackson family's troubles. The First National Bank building stood in the center of town, its red brick facade and white columns projecting stability and tradition. Eleanor remembered when it had been built in 1962, how proud Thomas had been to open accounts there when other banks in town still made black customers use separate entrances. I'll wait here, Marie said as she parked across the street. James might call, and someone should be available if he does. Eleanor nodded, understanding the unspoken truth. Marie also couldn't risk making a scene that might jeopardize her position at the hospital, the family's only remaining steady income. We'll be fine, Eleanor assured her. The Lord goes before us. As Eleanor and Zora climbed the stone steps to the bank entrance, Eleanor felt decades of history pressing on her shoulders. She'd walked these same steps as a young bride depositing Thomas's first paycheck, as a mother opening savings accounts for her children, as a widow transferring accounts after Thomas passed. The bank held her family's financial history in its vaults. Inside, the marble-floored lobby gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Eleanor approached the receptionist, a young woman she didn't recognize. Good morning, Eleanor said. I'm Eleanor Jackson. I need to speak with the board. They're meeting about my family's property right now. The receptionist frowned. I'm sorry, Mrs. Jackson, but the board meeting is closed. No visitors allowed. I'm not a visitor, Eleanor replied firmly. I'm a customer of 50 years and they're discussing my family's future without us present. Please tell Richard Peterson that Eleanor Jackson is here. The young woman hesitated, then picked up her phone and spoke quietly. After a moment, she hung up and shook her head. I'm sorry, but Mr. Peterson says the matter has already been decided. There's nothing to discuss. Eleanor felt Zora stiffen beside her. Grandma, they can't just— It's all right, child, Eleanor interrupted gently. Then to the receptionist, where is the meeting being held? Mrs. Jackson, I can't— The third-floor conference room, Eleanor stated rather than asked. The one with Thomas's photograph on the wall of founding contributors. Without waiting for a response, Eleanor walked toward the elevator, Zora following close behind. The receptionist called after them, but Eleanor did not break stride. Grandma, are we allowed to do this? Zora whispered as they entered the elevator. Sometimes, child, you have to make people see you, Eleanor replied. They've been counting on our politeness to keep us quiet. The elevator doors opened on the third floor, revealing a hushed corridor of expensive carpet and wood-paneled walls. Eleanor walked directly to the large double doors at the end of the hall where muffled voices could be heard discussing financial matters. She paused for just a moment, straightening her spine and lifting her chin. Wait here, she told Zora. Then, without knocking, she pushed open the doors. 7 pairs of eyes turned toward her in surprise. Richard Peterson was mid-sentence, standing at the head of the table with a PowerPoint presentation projected on the wall behind him, a slide showing foreclosure statistics for the quarter. You can't come in here, Mrs. Jackson. The board meeting started 20 minutes ago, and your family's case has already been dismissed. With all due respect, Mr. Peterson, I have every right to be heard, and I won't leave until the board acknowledges what your bank has done to my family. Like a lawyer on TV, James hugged his daughter tightly, then embraced his mother. I should never have let it get this far, Mama. I was too ashamed to fight back at first, too proud to admit what was happening. Eleanor cupped her son's face in her hands the way she had when he was a small boy scared of thunderstorms. There's no shame in being wrong, James, only in accepting wrong without standing up for what's right. James nodded, his eyes glistening. Marie called me this morning, told me you were coming here. I was meeting with the attorney, gathering everything we might need. I couldn't let you face them alone. We're Jacksons, Eleanor said simply. We stand together. The 3 generations of Jacksons sat in the reception area for nearly an hour. Occasionally, raised voices could be heard from behind the boardroom doors. The young receptionist offered them water and coffee, her manner much more respectful than earlier. Finally, the doors opened, and Sarah Collins emerged. Mrs. Jackson, Mr. Jackson, the board would like to speak with you both. They returned to the conference room, where the atmosphere had noticeably shifted. Richard Peterson remained at the head of the table, but his posture was less commanding. Harold Winters sat beside him with a legal pad covered in notes. Mr. and Mrs. Jackson, Richard began formally, the board has reviewed your documentation and concerns. While we make no admission of wrongdoing, we recognize there may have been irregularities in the processing of your loan. Eleanor raised an eyebrow but remained silent. Harold Winters stepped in. We're prepared to offer an immediate cessation of all foreclosure proceedings, a complete audit of your loan, and restoration of the original terms you agreed to. And compensation for lost wages and emotional distress, Sarah Collins added firmly. Richard shot her an irritated glance but didn't contradict her. And what about the other families? Eleanor asked. James mentioned there were others whose loans were similarly altered. The board members exchanged uncomfortable looks. We will be conducting a full internal review, Harold assured them. Any discrepancies will be addressed appropriately. In writing, James stated, it wasn't a question. Yes, Harold agreed. We can have an agreement drafted by this afternoon. Eleanor looked at her son, silently communicating in the way that families do after decades together. James gave a slight nod. We will review your agreement with our attorney, Eleanor said, and we expect a public statement from the bank about these irregularities. Our reputation in this community matters to us. Richard Peterson began to object, but Harold placed a cautioning hand on his arm. That can be arranged, Mrs. Jackson. As they prepared to leave, Sarah Collins approached Eleanor privately. Mrs. Jackson, I want you to know that I've ordered an immediate freeze on all foreclosure proceedings until we complete our review. No other families will face what yours did while I'm on this board. Eleanor studied the younger woman's face, seeing genuine determination there. You remind me of myself 40 years ago, when I became the first black principal at Jefferson Elementary. Sometimes being the only woman at the table means you have to speak twice as loud. Sarah smiled slightly. I'm learning that lesson every day. Outside the bank, Marie was waiting anxiously by the car. When she saw James with Eleanor and Zora, her face lit up with relief and confusion. James, what happened? Are you all right? James embraced his wife, holding her tighter and longer than he had in months. We're going to be all right, all of us. As they drove home, Eleanor gazed out the window at the town she'd known her entire life. They passed Jefferson Elementary, where she'd taught for 4 decades, the post office where Thomas had worked for 35 years, the church where they'd baptized James and later Zora. Every corner held memories of struggles and triumphs of a community that had transformed over her lifetime. "What happens now?" Zora asked from the back seat. "Now," Eleanor said, "we make sure the bank keeps its promises. Not just to us, but to everyone they've wronged." "And then," Marie prompted. Eleanor smiled, feeling a weight lifting from her shoulders for the first time in a year. "Then we continue what my parents and grandparents started. We build our legacy, we protect our community, and we remember that justice doesn't always come easily, but it's always worth fighting for." James reached over and took his mother's hand. "Thank you, Mama, for not giving up on me, for showing us all how to stand tall." "Family is forever," Eleanor replied, "and some chains are meant to be broken." 3 months later, Eleanor sat on her front porch, enjoying the cool September breeze. The maple tree Thomas had planted when James was born was beginning to show hints of fall color. The wooden swing creaked gently as she rocked, watching the neighborhood children ride their bikes along the sidewalk. The door opened behind her, and James stepped out carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. He handed one to his mother and sat beside her on the swing. "The last of the paperwork came through today," he said. "The house is officially secure with the original mortgage terms restored." Eleanor nodded, satisfaction warming her more than the afternoon sun. "And the others?" 17 families so far," James confirmed. "All having their original terms restored. The banking commission is overseeing everything." The investigation had revealed a systematic pattern targeting primarily older homeowners and those in historically black neighborhoods. Richard Peterson had been forced to resign, though public statements called it a retirement. His son had left town altogether, rumored to be under investigation for similar practices at his previous job. "Sarah Collins called," James continued. "The board has approved a community reinvestment plan. They're starting a special mortgage assistance program for first-time homebuyers in underserved neighborhoods. And they're naming it after Thomas," Eleanor added, still amazed by this development. "My Thomas, who couldn't even get a loan from them in 1960. Times change," James said. "Sometimes with a little push." Eleanor sipped her tea, thinking of all that had happened since that confrontation in the boardroom. James had been hired by a regional bank as a community development officer with a substantial increase in salary. Marie had reduced her nursing shifts from full-time to part-time, giving her more time with family. And Zora had written her college application essay about the experience earning scholarship offers from 3 universities. "I had a dream about your father last night," Eleanor said softly. "He was sitting right here, just like you are now. He said, 'You did good, Eleanor. You kept our family whole.'" James put his arm around his mother's shoulders. "You did more than that, Mama. You reminded an entire town what justice looks like." Down the street, Eleanor could see Zora walking home from her after-school job at the community center. The girl moved with confidence, her backpack slung over one shoulder, stopping occasionally to chat with neighbors. "She's so much like you," James observed. "Not afraid of anything," Eleanor smiled. "I've been afraid plenty of times." "The secret is not letting fear make your decisions for you." As Zora approached the house, they could see she was carrying a newspaper. She bounded up the porch steps, excitement radiating from her face. "Dad, Grandma, look!" She thrust the local paper toward them, folded open to a specific page. "Ms. Collins is featured in Banking Monthly talking about the Community Reinvestment Program." The article showed Sarah Collins standing proudly in front of the bank, with a quote about addressing historical inequities in lending practices. There was also a smaller photo of James in his new office. "They're calling it a model for other regional banks," Zora continued. "Ms. Collins specifically mentioned our case as the catalyst for change." Eleanor studied the article, her heart full. What had begun as a fight to save one family's home had grown into something that would benefit generations to come. "The Lord truly did work in mysterious ways." "The church called too," Zora added. "They want you to speak at the community action meeting next week, Grandma, about standing up for your rights." Eleanor raised her eyebrows. "At my age, I'm not sure I have the energy for public speaking anymore." James and Zora exchanged amused glances. "Somehow I think you'll find the strength, Mama," James said. "You always do when it matters." Later that evening, the entire Jackson family gathered around the dining table. Eleanor, James, Marie, Zora, and several cousins who lived nearby. The table was laden with Eleanor's famous fried chicken, collard greens seasoned with ham hocks the way her mother had taught her, cornbread still steaming from the oven, and sweet potato pie for dessert. Before they began eating, they joined hands for grace, a family tradition that had weathered every storm. Eleanor closed her eyes as James, following his father's tradition, said the blessing. Lord, we thank you for this food and for the hands that prepared it. We thank you for family, for keeping us together through trials and tribulations. We thank you for broken chains and restored hearts. And we ask that you help us use our blessings to bless others. Amen. Amen, the family echoed. As they passed dishes around the table, conversations flowed freely. Marie talked about her plans to start a support group for families facing foreclosure. James discussed the community workshop he was organizing on financial literacy. Zora shared her latest college acceptance letter. Eleanor observed it all with quiet joy. This was her legacy, not just the house or the land, but the values that would outlive her. Perseverance, justice, faith, family. After dinner, while the younger family members cleared the table, Eleanor stepped outside onto the porch once more. The evening star was just becoming visible in the deepening blue sky. She thought about all the evenings she and Thomas had spent on this porch, planning their future, dreaming of what their family might become. "We did it, Thomas," she whispered to the star. "Our family is whole, our chains are broken, our hearts are restored." From inside the house came the sound of laughter, 3 generations of Jacksons, strong and united, their future secure in the home their ancestors had worked so hard to provide. Eleanor smiled and turned to rejoin her family, each step carrying the weight of history and the lightness of victory. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.